Lisa Lundy, author of the Super Allergy Girl Allergy and Celiac Cookbook, and we're here today to give you some tips on how to be successful if you're cooking gluten-free, casein-free, or allergy-free, or all of the above. The first thing that we want to do when you're cooking with special ingredients or eliminating common food allergens is you want to start with a proven recipe. The reason that I suggest you start with a proven recipe is because if you're a beginner and you're removing gluten, you're removing dairy, eggs, tree nuts, or peanuts, that will alter the consistency and texture and properties of a baked good. So if you start with a proven recipe, you're going to increase your chances of success. The next thing we want you to do is in the beginning, if you can at all help it, try to skip substituting. And the reason I recommend this is because if you have a proven recipe and you follow it in the way the recipe is designed, you again increase your chances of success. Once you're accomplished and you have had some success under your belt, then you can go ahead and start substituting and see how you make out, but you'll at least have a foundation of success. The next tip for success is to use an oven thermometer. Now I know when I say to use an oven thermometer, having taught classes and worked with people for years, this, by the way, is a very well-worn and used oven thermometer, is to get this and put it in your oven, even if your oven is brand new. I mean, brand spanking new. What most people find when they use an oven thermometer is that their oven is off a little bit, too high, too low, and even something as minimal as 25 degrees when you are cooking without gluten, dairy, and eggs makes a big difference. So get one and use one of those, and that'll increase your chances of success. The next thing that is extremely important is to use a full cup of flour. I'm going to show you what I mean by a full cup of flour and tell you why we recommend using a full cup of flour. A full cup of flour can be obtained one of two ways. One, you can use a sifter and sift into your cup of flour. That takes a little time and a little energy. The other way to get a full cup of flour is to just simply spoon the flour into the cup and then leave a little extra over top. So you've got a little mound. That gives you the equivalent of sifting a cup of flour. The reason this is important in recipes is because many recipes that are, say in my cookbook and in other gluten-free, dairy-free recipes, they have been family recipes that have been converted from wheat recipes. And so to keep the liquid ingredients the same and the other ingredients the same, you use a conversion process. And therefore, all of my recipes require a full cup of flour. So you want to either sift your flour or use that little faster method to get a full cup of flour to get the best results. And I know my friend Betty Hagman, who's no longer with us, she also used to recommend using a full cup of flour also. The next tip for success is to get a cake testing tool if you don't already have one. Now a cake testing tool looks like this. They're usually metal. They're usually sold in cooking and baking stores. And you want to use this if you're unsure about whether something is done or not. A very important tool, especially if you're baking bread. Now, speaking of baking bread, that's a nice segue into my next tip, which is rethink bread. Use rolls instead. Not to be happily rhyming, but the reason we recommend that you rethink bread is because bread is a little bit more involved and a little bit more work. You can get a great gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free loaf of bread. However, it's only going to be great on the first day. Then, even if you slice it with wax paper, sheets of wax paper between it, you're going to have to freeze it, and it's just never the same after day one. Whereas, if you use a nice roll recipe from my cookbook, it'll come out of the freezer like it was fresh baked. So why spend more time and more energy baking bread when you can have less time, less energy, and a better result for day 2 and day 3 with rolls? Next tip for success is to proof your yeast separately. Now, if you're not familiar with proofing the yeast separately, I'll give you a little idea. Proofing the yeast separately, you're going to put your yeast into water that's between 105 and 115 degrees. If the water's not hot enough, or if the water is too hot. If the water's too hot, it's going to kill your yeast. If the water is too cool, it won't wake up the yeast. You also put a teaspoon of sugar in with your yeast, and you let it brew for about 5 minutes until you get a little bit of a foam on top, but not until the foam is coming over the edge of the cup. That's overproofed yeast. Okay, the next thing that's very important when you're doing specialty baking, whether it's gluten-free, casein-free, or allergy-free baking, is to hold back some of the liquid. Well, unless you know you need it. So the reason that I say to hold back some of the liquid in a recipe is because there are variations in how you measure from day to day. So in other words, as a very experienced and seasoned baker, I've made multiple batches of one recipe, and I found that I measure differently for the same recipe. And therefore, the amount of liquid has varied for myself, given a proven recipe that I know. So people measure flour differently. Some are a little heavier measures, some are lighter measures, and even yourself, you can measure differently. So if you take the liquid, hold a little bit back till you know you need it, you've increased your chances of success. The next hot tip for being successful is to find support in your community. And when I say find support in your community, there are celiac support groups, there are autism family parent support groups, many of which are using the GFCF diet for their children. And even if you don't have autism or you don't have a child with autism, many of those autistic parent support groups or GFCF diet support groups are extremely welcoming to normal people to be involved. And I know at least in Buffalo, New York, the autism community welcomed me over 8 years ago. Even though we didn't have that as an issue. And the other area that you can find support in your community is to see if there's anybody from the Feingold Association, which is a special group dedicated and committed to removing preservatives, additives, and educating the public about the impact of food and food on your health. So the Feingold Association may have either a chapter or some other parents they could hook you up with. Next, the last tip is, if you're a beginner and you're not that experienced in the kitchen, is to start watching the TV cooking shows. If you're very seasoned as a cook and as a baker, that's probably not going to bring a lot of assistance to you, but if you're new, that would be a valuable thing. And the last thing, to give you some punched power in cooking, doing specialty cooking, is to get a copy of The Joy of Cooking. Now, the reason I recommend, as a cookbook author, another cookbook is because this is like an encyclopedia for your cooking. It's got 850 pages, a lot of which are reference information about how to cook meats, different preserving techniques. This is a good encyclopedia for you, whether you're a beginner or experienced. So that's 11 tips to get you started and hopefully help you be successful. And we've got some other videos on our website to help you be successful and be empowered in the area of food. Enjoy.